lecture on form and content appreciation. So this time round, we will be speaking a little bit more about form and content, and specifically, we're going a little bit deeper into what form and content is all about. And the topics for this lecture are summary of components of art. And this we tackled in the previous lecture, where we really spent a lot of time just defining some of the terminologies. This is subject matter, content, form, and even context. And we also did a visual analysis of a picture for Katrina. So we're just going to summarize this today. The second part of this lecture will tackle representational art. We'll also look at abstract art. We'll also look at non-representational art, as well as the artist and his subjects. The lecture will be about 30 minutes, right? So as we had indicated previously, the basic components of a work of art are mainly three. There are mainly three. The first one being subject, and the subject addresses the what, So this refers to the visual focus or image that may be extracted from examining the work, right? The second one is content. Content informs on the why, and it is the meaning that is communicated by the artists of the work. Form is the third component, and it informs on the how. And this is sort of the broader context through which the artist developed and configured the artwork. It lends itself to discussing how the visual elements are arranged, the medium that was used by the artist, as well as the materials that went into creating this piece of art. And I guess form is really the totality of what informs the artwork that is being viewed. I hope this is now clear to everyone. Now, so we're going to now dive into representational art. And also people refer to it as figurative art. And I guess it's the most basic and simplest form of art, because at a glance, you're able to tell what is going on in the picture. It represents normally people, objects in the real world, and you're able to tell exactly what it is, So long as you have eyes to see, you're able to tell what it is. Usually, looking at it, it's quite recognizable. They are clearly derived from real objects and real object sources. It could be from nature. It could be, the human person. And therefore, their definition represents something strong from the visual realm, So it's really what you see in the visible world. Some of the common examples of representational art are portraits and still lifes. So if you ever see someone saying, pose for me so that I can draw you, that definitely will end up being a representational art. If you ever see someone put a mock-up of things on a table, arrange something, or view an object and draw from observation, that's what we call still life. And normally, again, the output normally will tend to also be representational art. So I guess other artworks include those that use other materials. And I guess, materials means the medium. But in essence, when you look at the output of that artwork, all you will end up saying is that it truly represents things that you can easily recognize, right? So I guess everyone now can have a go or have a hunch on what non-representational art is. The other one is the reverse, where you can't really tell what is being represented. So the next slide shows one of the world's greatest pieces of art. It still exists to date, and it is being housed at, it's being housed in one of these famous galleries. I think it's in one of these British galleries. However, what I'd like to say about it is the subject of this painting is, of course, a woman. This is, even by telling by her dressing, she was a very affluent woman. And the name of the painting is Gioconda Mona Lisa, right? So it is considered one of the most valuable paintings in the world. It's definitely, if you go and look at the readings, it holds the Guinness Book of World Records as the highest known painting insurance valuation at a historic 100 million US dollars. That was in 1962. So in current day currency today, it would be equivalent to $1 billion, right? And this painting was painted by a gentleman called Leonardo da Vinci, I think all-time favorite artists of our time. Not only was he a painter, he was also a sculptor, he was a writer, he was an inventor, and so on and so forth. And this painting dates, it's not too clear, but it dates between 1503 and 1505. And it's about slightly smaller than a meter by a meter wide, right? So looking at this piece, we would say it's it's truly a representational art, simply because you're able to decipher what the subject matter is at a glance, right? So I don't think there's much more to say about this painting, because from a representational art point of view, because I think it's very clear. I mean, we can see she's Caucasian. There's a landscape scene behind her, and she's definitely seated like she was posed. She was posing for Leonardo da Vinci. So we'll come back home and look at some African art. So if you go to the next slide, we have, again, one of the greatest, in my view, Kenyan contemporary artists. He's called Patrick Mukabi. He's a painter, and he's well known by his peers as Panye. So everyone knows him as that. And he is plausibly Kenya's most multi-talented visual artist. I think he runs a center where he teaches people how to paint and draw. Whenever you walk into a Java or some of these, like his work, even on Twitter, he's very vocal on Twitter. He's always selling miniatures, minute miniatures of his art, or even new art pieces. He's been around the world, globally he's acclaimed in the art world as well, and has been to over 23 countries, exhibiting and teaching for over 2 decades. And I guess, most of you may have seen his work, you just don't know who he's called. He's called Patrick Mukabi. And his distinctive depiction of African women is his signature. So he always has them, very voluptuous, very self-assured women. If you look at even the paintings, they're very self-assured, very vivid, very bright. And then they always seem to be cladded in an African kanga, or they have a kitamba, like the way African or Kenyan women would dress. That's how he dresses them. And then, and I guess he has built a name because of this signature, or his trademark, if you may call it. So again, these two paintings, so the Baridi series, that was painted in 2007, and Gary Kibanda, which we're not too clear when it was painted, but this has actually been sold to someone. As you can see, it's been sold to someone for a price of Kenyan shillings 125,000. These two paintings, I think because we are all Kenyans, we appreciate the work, right? We understand the name of the painting and can relate it to the subject matter as well as the content of the paintings. So these two paintings here are also examples of representational art. In the picture to my right, it's definitely two women who've popped open their boot and they're selling their wares on the roadside. On the other side, which is on the left, it's a woman who's definitely, we're seeing her back, but we know she's enjoying a cold soda, or she's being given a cold soda to drink by the Coca-Cola store vendor. So again, quite representational, but beautifully stylized by, of course, no other than Patrick Mukabi. So I think we're clear on what representational art is. And I guess as we now start looking at form and content, we're able to quickly see the distinction between art pieces. Some will be abstract and non-representational, others will be representational art, and definitely recognizable in the real world as we know it. So the next form of, I guess, visual analysis or formal analysis is abstract art. Now, abstract art is based on the image. It's definitely based from an image in the real world. And the only difference is sometimes it exists as a continuum from somewhat representational art to work that is far removed from actual world representation. So the basic way of saying this is symbols. I don't know if you've seen symbols, like the symbol when someone says Coca-Cola, you know, the way that's written, that's an abstract way. You know, the cursive handwriting. Typography could be abstractish, but even symbols and icons could be abstract, you know. That they're just represented in an abstract way, right? But you can also have abstract art that's completely unrecognizable, that you really don't know what's happening or what's going on, right? So I'd say that's why we're saying abstract. Abstract sits between the nexus of representational and non-representational. It just depends on what sort of abstract art you're looking at. For some, it's full-on abstract. You can perhaps tell what it is, but of course it's not really, doesn't manifest in the real world. And sometimes it can be completely unrecognizable in the real world, and it says something totally different. And we'll actually see a little bit of this. So in most abstract art, figures are often simplified, so there's always like sort of this distortion, and that's why I said symbols are the most basic of abstract forms, or there's an interpretation of it from the real world. It could also be an exaggeration of something, like say you see a painting of someone, then you see big eyes, you know, then you're like, okay. So abstract, sometimes that's a piece of art of a portrait that sits between representational and non-representational, right? Or it could even be geometric. So abstract figures can be simplified, they can be distorted, they can be exaggerated, or they can be geometric. Now, I think we've talked about Pablo Picasso. Now, Pablo Picasso is, I guess, the world's most famous 20th century artist, and we'll have a look at his work. So if you look at that piece, just turn to the next page, you'll see an art piece, and what you see there is the weeping woman, right? I'd mentioned her in our previous presentation. I'm mentioning his works or this painting of a lady today because I think this is a very good representation of abstract art, right? If you look at the painting, first you see definitely it's a woman. I think the long hair shows this, the hat on her head. Definitely it's clear she's a woman. I don't see her being a man. And then, but you know, you have to take those guesses because you're actually looking at things to show she's a woman. But I think also there's earrings in her ears, you know. So that just goes to show you that as you try and analyze the art, you kind of get to see she's a woman. But I think what's significant is that she doesn't look right. Does she look like she looks like a normal human being? No. You can see like she has this split face where on one side, she's kind of sort of like, you can see hands and tears, you can see grief, you know. And I think as you interpret it, you can see a lot of sorrow. There's even black and white over here. Like there's something really sad about what's going on, you know. He's even used hues of green and yellow and so on and so forth. So this painting is actually it's a real lady. Let me call her one of his women. The woman is called Dora Mara, And this woman was actually a mistress and a muse, for real, of Picasso. Now, he produced a series of this type of paintings, like very somber, very sad paintings, as a response to the bombing in Guernica. That's actually a town that exists in the Spanish Civil War. And it's also, this painting is also associated with a very famous painting that he did paint. And it's part of the iconographies in this painting. It's called the Guernica. I had mentioned this painting. Please go online and look at the Guernica and just see how powerful that painting is. It was a big mural, like from, I think, approximately 2 to 3 meters long. And you can actually see a similar painting of this weeping woman as one of the iconographies on that bigger painting of the Guernica. So this art is clearly an abstract art. It definitely is not representational, though it sits between representational and non-representational. So this is a very good example of a typical abstract. Again, I like basing my artworks, at least the examples I gave, both from a local and a global context. So for local context, we're looking at another painting. Who wants to take a guess at who the artist is? Yes, so why I'm showing this is because I hardly see, people who are alive talking about their own work. So because I'm still alive, I can talk about my own work. So this is a good classic representation of abstract, but I first show you the process of how it moves from representational art to an abstract art. So on the left, you see what was drawn from a still life image. And the image was basically a bunch of flowers. This type of flowers are called alstromerias. They are grown in this country for export. So I sketched only one branch, right? But from this very one branch, there's an extraction or abstraction of sorts that happen that I, digitally maneuvered the elements of this piece of art and made it into a pattern. I don't know if you see similarities, like you see some leaves were extracted and they made a certain part of the painting. The petals were removed and they were abstracted to make part of the pattern, and so on and so forth. So these are two different art pieces, but based on one piece. Are you seeing that? So one is representational art, one is abstracted into a pattern. Yeah? So are we seeing the distinct difference of what representational art is and what abstract is? So it is possible for artists to actually have one distinct type of art that is representational, or they're able to merge both non-representational and representational, or they're strictly going to sit in the representational space, right? So this part where it's a bit in between is what we're calling abstract art. Are we clear? Right? Okay. So I'd like to say that, yes, just so that it's on record, I call myself many things, but one of it is I call myself a creative director, a graphic designer, and a pattern designer. So I recently just started doing pattern design, and for the simple reason that I cannot name even one African who does pattern design. Not even one. Like, I cannot tell you who, because we never call them out. However, I studied pattern designers during the modern era of the 20th century. One famous pattern designer is called William Morris. He really inspires my work. William Morris was an excellent pattern designer. He based most of his works on florals or nature, and I also love floral and nature, so I also base my works on the very same subject. However, my style and technique is totally different from William Morris. He's English, I'm Kenyan, and therefore I'm informed by my own context, the vibrant colors that I see around me and so on and so forth. So this style is a style that I coined Afro-floral, simply because of the vibrancy of the colors that I use to depict the patterns that I created. Now, you can get the actual artwork on Shutterstock. You can purchase it on Shutterstock. Whereas for the pattern, you can get it on various platforms, which include Spoonflower, Contrado, Society6, and so on and so forth. So move on to the next slide. So what is non-representational art? So non-representational art is extreme. So it is extremely extreme. And it's an extreme form of the abstract art. And really, when you look at it, even at a glance, it is not connected to the real world. When you look at it, you're like, I don't know what it represents. I don't know where it's from. Until you start perhaps doing a little further analysis, is when perhaps you'll be able to take a guess, right? So it may simply depict shapes, colors, lines, but may also express things that are not visible, such as emotions, feelings, and so on, right? So have a look at those two paintings. Now, these two paintings are from a Russian artist. He was actually a writer, a poet, and of course a painter. And I'm not sure if he was a musician, but yeah, we can read about him. His name is, he's called Vasily Kandinsky, and he lived during the 20th century as well. So if you look at his paintings, you can tell they span between 1913 and 1923. So essentially, that's when these paintings were done. But I'd like to describe the two so that you see how non-representational art could be analyzed and interpreted verbally, right? So I'd like to describe it so that you actually have a listen. So when people first saw his works, this guy, the first one, which is now the composition 7, right? They were moved by the emotion. So there's a lot of emotion in that picture. You see a lot of things, but you also see some emotion. Some emotion is derived from this picture. And when they then saw the change in composition 8, they felt it being a different style. So they saw, this one is more geometric than the first one. So the first one had more color. Perhaps it was more, how do you call it? Chaotic. Like you'd feel that there's a crescendo of sorts. It's like, ta-da! You actually felt that emotion. Whereas on this one, it's more chaotic. There's chaos, rhythm, etc. on the picture, right? So this transition is, so you can't really tell what it is that he was trying to represent in words. Like you can't really say, because what you're seeing is just movement and things. Everything has been abstracted into shapes, color, and line. So I think from a non-representational art context, this is a very classic example, that we can't really tell what he's drawing because all we're seeing is lines and colors, but we can feel something, right? So I'm sure all of you can feel something when you look at these pieces, right? So his work is described as a logical development of a creative genius. He was actually considered a genius. And his work was influenced by certain movements. So one of the movements that influenced his works was suprematism, as well as constructivism. And also, there was a movement called Bauhaus. Now, during the early 1900s, there was a lot of movements happening at the same time. That's when full industrialization was happening. So there were many movements. So there was constructivism, Mara, Goth was just fading, Bauhaus was coming up, and so on and so forth. So he was really influenced by this time and era, and also even certain things that were going on in his life. Like, Russians enjoy the opera. So if you notice, some of these symbols or things that he puts in his artworks, you can feel like music. I don't know if you feel that sense, that there's some music aspects to it. And also, his works were practical expressions of his theoretical ideals, like what he believed in, right? They were intuitive and poetic interpretations. So because he was a writer, when it came to him doing his art, he was very poetic. So it was a bit, so you actually start seeing that because he could write well. Perhaps for him to draw was to interpret things in a very poetic way and not necessarily represent his works in a way that you would say, that's a picture of a man or a woman and so on. No, he actually was just depicting some of his theoretical understanding of what he experienced in his life, or some of his ideologies, and so on and so forth. So Kandinsky was a writer, and when he wrote, he was consistent and methodological. But when working on canvas with figures and colors, he became sensual and impulsive. So you could see, some of the strokes were just done with a ruler, So basically that's impulsiveness in his art. And that's essentially how he communicated in his art pieces, right? He hoped that the audiences would perceive his works emotively. So for him, the single most important thing was not to appreciate the beauty. Most people usually when they look at art, they look at it, is it beautiful, is it not, then they move on. No. For him, it was not about the beauty, it was about the emotion you derive from the art. I hope now we're being clear. And we're becoming more intellectually savvy in how to speak about art, right? Okay. So I will close with two things: the artist and his subject, and I will discuss a picture, and then I'll give you an assignment, right? So the artist and his subject is really just about the person who draws the artwork. And these are just things you need to keep top of mind when you're looking at an art piece. So remember, every artist is free to depict, or at least choose what subject they want to represent in their artwork, right? So if you went to the Nairobi Design Festival, I don't know if you guys encountered a certain group of artists and they call themselves censored art. Did you guys see those people? You did, right? I like the way he's laughing. The one who's laughing must have seen them. Did you see them? Did you see the ones who said they are calling themselves censored art? Did you listen to what they had to say about their pieces? What did they say? They said, let me tell you what they said, because I remember hearing one of the gentlemen there saying, yes, our work has been banned. It's been banned in Kenya. In fact, one of our paintings was going overseas to France, and it was frozen from leaving the country. It was sent back. Basically, we could not ship it to our client. And that's simply because some of the themes that they had expressed on that art was perhaps, from a Kenyan point of view, was not acceptable, It was vulgar. Perhaps it was not something that Kenyans wanted to associate with. And I think some of these themes. I won't belabor, but they're censored because of the certain themes that they carry. A lot of these art pieces are actually censored, or they are destroyed, even a long time ago in other sort of societies, simply because of the themes that they depict. So, but always remember that whenever an artist goes out of their way to do something, it's a social commentary on what's happening in that society. So, how many of you guys went on Saturday? On Saturday, the date? So I bought one of their paintings. Did you see a white painting with 5 nudes? Did anyone see a painting of 5 nudes? It was there. It was there up till Tuesday. Who saw the painting? It was a small painting like that, like A4 or A3, and it had 5 nude women. Who saw that painting? I bought it. It's in my house right now. If you want Larry Gitobu's work, I own a piece of his work. But for me, so someone will ask me, why did I buy that artwork? Huh? Wouldn't you be curious to know why I bought it? I bought it because it's social commentary on what's currently happening. When you guys watch news, do you hear that? I don't know if you've heard. I want to ask. Haven't you heard that there's this whole pizzazz around our government becoming a religious government? Have you heard that? So anyway, so what I was saying was that, so why I bought the painting was for two reasons. One is, there is currently, right now, the Kenya we live today, there's a lot of fun being thrown at the government. And I think there are people even who are saying, you know what, Madam President should open a ministry of prophecy for those who, because of the lens through which they go into doing things like, praying at events and so on and so forth. So there's that aspect. But on the other side, there's also a lot of talk from the global arena trying to sort of demolish Kenyans for not being LGBT. You do know this, right? So there's a lot of talk of why is it that Kenyans, you don't embrace the fact that all of us were different, and appreciate even, the LGBT community and so on and so forth. Do you hear those stories? Do you hear those stories? So we're living in an era where we have an ironic, it's an irony. On one hand, we have a government that's extremely religious, Protestant religious. And on the other hand, we have people who are, and even in the public we know, some have been murdered and they were actually in these LGBT communities. We've had them, we've had people look down upon these people and so on and so forth. Do you see the irony? And so, in my view, I would like a piece of that history. And that's why I bought that painting. Because the painting is definitely something that will never be approved or endorsed by this government, and perhaps even banned from public viewership, if you know what I mean, or considered even vulgar. But who are we to judge this? And I guess, that's a question I'm posing to you. But generally, for me, I needed to own a piece of what is banned or what is controversial or what is vulgar. Because when I look at it 10 years in, I'll be reminding myself that I lived in an era when LGBT was looked down upon. Because in 10 years' time, what do you think? What is your guess? What is your guess, guys? In 10 to 20 years' time?
Maybe the restrictions will be...
Sorry?
Maybe
correct. Maybe the stigmatization will be over. Maybe it will not be a controversial topic. It will be very sort of saying, it will be like any normal conversation we'll be having. So do you understand now when I say that art also sometimes depends on the on the times in which it's made, right? So this person, perhaps that artist has a different interpretation. Mine is different, right? But he may have a different interpretation. But the fact remains that art is a social commentary of what is happening most of the time. It's about the experience of the artist. It's about what's happening in society. And let me tell you, sometimes you may be looking at a famous artist, but you don't know it. And then in 10 years' time, this artist becomes so famous you can't afford him. Guess what? Shiza will be smiling and say, when he was affordable and young, I owned a piece of him, and I now have that person's work in my house, right? So I think the idea here is that let's start appreciating more art and start looking at some of the elements that an artist chooses as being part of their subject. So things like mediums, things like time, patronage, development in science and technology, and of course what I call experiences, are always infused in art pieces. And this can only come from the artist, right? So we'll conclude by saying you have a better understanding of what form and content appreciation is from these 4 elements or aspects: form, subject, which is related to content, as well as, so there's form, context, content, and subject. So all of you now are in a very good position to interrogate what you saw at the Nairobi Design Week. And I will share with you the assignment through Amara for you to actually tackle. Now, before I close and allow Nishant to come speak, I'd like you to just go to the very end of the presentation. The one that says thank you. Can someone please take a guess at what type of art that is? Can someone take a guess at what it's? Yes, tribal, but we've just learned some types of art. So what type of art is it? Representational, correct. So it is representational art to start with. Can someone tell me what genre of art it is? It's hyperrealism. I like that. That's a very good one. Yes, it could be hyperrealism. What other type of art could it be? What? Correct. So this, you're informing the form. The way it was generated using AI technology. So that is the form. So anyone else who wants to make an attempt at the genre? Because he's speaking about form. The genre is Afrofuturism. This is something we ought to speak more of. Afrofuturism is on the rise. I wrote a paper on the same. I will send you guys the link through Amara. Afrofuturism is becoming a form that we can totally celebrate. For me, I call it the Renaissance of African art. Now, I want to read an excerpt that accompanied this art piece so that you understand what Afrofuturism. It has construct of fiction, like science fiction. It has contrasts of mythology and sci-fi, if I may say so. So let me read an excerpt to close. The people of the Ngochola civilization lived around 250,000 years ago in Alkebulan, which in quotes is Africa. They lived in a technologically advanced civilization and had the knowledge to communicate with other civilizations. It is believed that people lived peacefully in their nation for more than 1,000 years before a natural disaster wiped them out, along with all their inventions and knowledge. This expert is courtesy of Slick CEO City, and it was uploaded, I think, perhaps 3 or 4 days ago. And this is the year 2023. And without a doubt, this is a type of art that is representational art. The genre is Afrofuturism, and the subject matter is a gentleman, an old man, an elderly man who has this beautiful embellish of art around it. But guess what? All this art is engineered. It is not painted, it's not hand-drawn, it's all been generated using AI. Thank you.